It started as a benign sleepwalk, became a violent episode.
He might have woke up and panicked and then hiding it all.
He dragged the body. I think he woke up.
He said he was very tired and that he couldn't keep up with everything. And sometimes he was a walking zombie.
Whatever state he was in, I don't think he was in his right mind. I think he snapped.
You can't get away with murder.
I feel that he was awake. I know that he was awake.
Something in my head had broken. It had to be me.
You're listening to True Crime Arizona, the podcast.
I remember waking up in my underwear on the floor next to the bed, all curled up in a ball, just shivering, and that was in the middle of the night.
Inside a Phoenix courtroom, people crowded in to hear the suspect take the stand in his own trial.
The next thing that I remember was hearing people screaming and dogs barking. That's kind of like I just remember heavy, and then sort of coming to.
In 1999, it was a case that not only captivated Arizona, but gained international attention. News vans lined downtown Phoenix for 12 hours a day during the trial. Everyone held their breath, waiting to find out if Scott Falater would be found guilty of murdering his wife Yarmila. Though the murder itself was gruesome and unforgiving, that's not why the case made headline news.
I assumed that I must have gone crazy, or something in my head had broken.
Scott Falater didn't deny he killed his wife.
You're charged with homicide, first degree. You understand the charge?
Yes, I do.
But his defense? He didn't remember any of it because he said he was sleepwalking. The saga began 2 years earlier, in January 1997. The next-door neighbors told reporters what they heard as they were jolted awake.
We just heard her yelling, and you could hear her rolling around in the rocks. Yeah, we went outside to see if we could hear, if somebody needed help or something, and then the screaming quit.
Scott Falater had been outside trying to fix his pool pump. Greg Coons and his girlfriend were next door and watched over the fence as Falater stabbed his wife Yarmila 44 times, then dragged the body into the pool and held her head underwater, and eventually stashed the bloody knife and his clothes in his car. This all unfolded while his 12 and 15-year-old children, Megan and Michael, were asleep inside their home.
You had uniquely a next-door neighbor who watched most of this. It's very hard to prove to a jury that if you were sleepwalking, that you could do all of these actions, quieting the dog, going up the stairs, turning on a light, taking clothes off, going down to the garage, getting things out of the garage, putting things back into the trunk of the car.
Ron Reinstein was the judge in the Falater case.
Well, I just had a habit of doing this. Always in red, felt trip pen.
He saved all his notes from the trial, things he scribbled down that caught his attention.
Neighbors' testimony was very compelling. There were a lot of people that testified.
In the 90s, the judge would decide the sentencing. What happened to Scott Falater was ultimately in Reinstein's hands.
Do you think he was asleep during the entire ordeal?
Did I believe in the sleepwalking defense? I thought it was well done, well put together, but it wasn't that persuasive to me in the end.
To those who knew the Falater family, nothing made sense.
Church-oriented, focused around their children, and no, I'm surprised.
The reaction was not that family. Peaceful, quiet, pleasant.
When they heard he murdered Yarmila, friends were stunned and confused.
When I heard it happened, I was driving in my car. It was, I think, lunchtime, and I think I was going to lunch. And I was in my car driving down the road, and it came on the radio. And my mouth just dropped, and I thought, did I hear that right? No, there can't be more than one Scott Falater, so that has to be the Scott I know. I was shocked.
This woman, who asked we don't use her name, worked with Falater at Motorola for years.
What was he like as a person, as an employee?
Well, as a person and employee, I found Scott to be pleasant. I got to know him on a personal level on these business trips, and he just seemed like a good family man, genuine nice guy. He would talk about his family with, great, what is the word I'm searching for? Just with great kindness and great love.
What went through your mind when you heard the details of what unfolded that night?
When I heard the details, I felt like maybe you really don't know people like you thought you did, or how could I miss not knowing he had that in him?
She and Falater would frequently travel together. He was an engineer for the company.
He would be under tremendous amount of pressure from his management to get products released on time. So the deadlines that he had to meet were incredibly tough. And everybody gets stressed and tense, but I never saw him lose his cool.
When Falater testified, he talked about the heavy workload.
Yeah, I think I have 4 or 5 or 6 patents, something like that. Like 6 months long. Basically, get the chip working by this date, and it's 6 months in the future. You work long hours to meet that.
The defense argued major stress from work could trigger a sleepwalking episode.
He said he was very tired and that he couldn't keep up with everything, and sometimes he was a walking zombie.
They brought in witnesses who could paint a history of a violent sleep disorder. Falater's sister Laura Healy took the stand, recalling a time decades earlier when her brother was sleepwalking in their kitchen and she accidentally touched him.
And when I did that, I brushed against him and he turned around and lifted me up and just tossed me through the air.
His sister said there was no reason he would have intentionally killed his wife, remembering words her brother had told her.
Love each other, and don't stop courting after you're married. Megan is always ragging on Yarm and me because she claims we're always making out in front of her. Funny, our behavior hasn't changed.
Falater's kids only saw a loving marriage too, Judge Reinstein recalled.
Did the kids think or believe that he was asleep through the whole thing?
I think so. I think the kids believe that.
The defense laid it all out. Scott Falater had a history of a sleep disorder and did not mean to kill his wife. They knew Falater wouldn't be found innocent, but believed the jury could see why a lesser conviction should be made than first-degree murder. Falater himself described the moment to the jury when he says he woke up and realized what he had done.
I assume that I must have gone crazy, or that something in my head had broken. I went through some scenarios where maybe this is a frame job, but the things I remember Detective Norman pointing out blood on me during the interrogation, which, as I thought about it, just really sort of confirmed that it had to be me.
Judge Reinstein says sympathy for Scott Falater in the courtroom was short-lived once the prosecution ramped up.
Explain to me then, as you're stabbing your wife 44 times and she's screaming and you're moving about, how it is that a little teeny tiny alarm on your hand can wake you up and her screaming can't.
It didn't always wake me up, and I'm not a sleep doctor. I can't explain the difference, sir.
Sleep experts were brought in to testify on both sides of the case.
It started as a benign sleepwalk, became a violent episode, and then proceeded through a confusional arousal until he was arrested.
I feel that he was awake. I know that he was awake during these episodes, that he was conscious of certain decisions. That's my opinion of what he was doing during that time.
Reinstein remembers what seemed to make the most impact in the trial.
Expert witnesses were, very powerful, and I think that when they heard that, some of the jurors probably thought maybe he was sleepwalking during part of the incident, during the stabbing. I think that they changed from that based on the number of stab wounds, and also then coming back to the body, dragging it over the pool, into the pool. And I think there was some testimony from Dr. Pressman that, you know, people may have episodes of violent sleepwalking, but they don't take this long, and they don't have as many conscious efforts as, you know, as was had in this case.
So we took the case to a current top sleep expert in Phoenix, Lori Ledley.
I have been fascinated with sleep for many years.
Scott Falater claimed he couldn't remember 45 to 50 minutes of that night, the time frame he said he was asleep and stabbed his wife before dragging her to the pool. I wanted to know if it was actually possible he may have been asleep the entire time.
When somebody is sleepwalking, what happens in their mind?
In a parasomnia like sleepwalking, you don't remember what you do while you're sleepwalking. If you wake up in REM, you recall your dream. When you're sleepwalking, it's usually in that slow wave delta sleep that we see on a sleep study. There's no recall of your memory, but you are actually physically moving around.
What wakes somebody up when they're sleepwalking?
So it would be very difficult to actually wake someone up while they're sleepwalking because they're in a very deep state of sleep.
When you hear 44 times, right, you think, how could he not wake up? She's likely screaming. Would that not wake somebody up?
I agree that it should, because the movements are very intentional, right? 44 stabs, yes. But you also wonder, in that unconscious mind, we have no idea what really is going on.
I asked Lori about the timeline. From start to finish, just under an hour of time, Falater said he couldn't remember.
Is that realistic?
I think it could happen, although the timing of all those events and someone to be in a deep state of sleep throughout all those events, I personally find highly unlikely. I've never seen a sleepwalking episode last longer than 20 minutes. I draw the line where he put her in the pool.
That just doesn't seem possible.
I feel like he might have woke up and panicked and then hiding it all. Yeah, I just don't believe that he was asleep all that time.
Ultimately, the jury agreed.
We, the jury, duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action, upon our oaths do find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree.
Judge Reinstein listened as the verdict was handed down.
They came back with a first-degree murder charge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That would mean then they all thought that this was premeditated.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it was premeditated?
Well, the jury thought that it was. There was no motive, I think, that was ever shown. My impression was that the swimming pool incident was the difference for anybody who thought he may have been sleepwalking.
And in a moment still rare to this day, several of the jurors got in front of TV cameras right after to explain how they came to the verdict.
I felt that maybe the first 2 stabs to Yarmila, but the number of stab wounds, the fact that she was drugged to the pool and held under, I can't believe I can't believe that he was sleepwalking.
After the murder had taken place and panicked and tried to cover it up.
Taking the clothes and putting them in the container, putting the container inside the trunk, cleaning up, changing clothes, that just struck us as not quite believable. The fact that the defendant came back to the body and held the body underwater, well, that showed that to us that there was intent.
After all was said and done, it was up to Judge Ron Reinstein to sentence Scott Falater. He had 3 options. He could sentence him to death, to life in prison with no parole, or life in prison with a possibility of parole after 25 years.
You could have put this man to death. What went into your decision to give him life in prison?
Well, I mean, weighing against him was the cruelty of the murder, 44 stab wounds, what happened afterward with the swimming pool. But I think what made the biggest difference to me is you had these 2 children who had lost their mother. Now one way or another, they were going to lose their father. And they really did not want him to get the death penalty. And then Jarmila's mother, same thing for the children. She felt that he shouldn't get death because the children could still have some type of relationship with him.
Do you feel like to this day you made the right decision in the sentencing?
You mean as far as giving him natural life? Yeah. Yes, I do.
Scott Falater will spend the rest of his life in prison with no possibility of parole. His friends will always question what truly happened that night.
Do you believe he was asleep when he killed his wife?
I'm not sure what I believe. Having known him, the only thing that I feel is that whatever state he was in, I don't think he was in his right mind. Because I think he snapped.
Just as he said on the stand that day in 1999, Scott Falater has never changed his story.
Did you have any thought in your mind or intent in your mind to kill Jarmila?
No way. No way. I mean, the furthest thing from my mind.
I'm journalist Briana Whitney. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me and produced by Sergio Hernandez. You can find our podcast and latest investigations wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also find the video versions on the AZ Family app, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire.